Hello and welcome to Kitchen After Dark. I am your host, Clinton Hazel Jr. And tonight, we about to have a good time. I'm making chicken and waffles with a side of mac and cheese. I got some really great friends coming over. Let's start with the chicken. All right, we're gonna do fried chicken that goes with the waffle. So it's all about the seasoning. I woke up in the spotlight, I'm feeling real good, like, okay. That's how you really know I feel good today. I'm like, flying so high. Wait, y'all didn't think it was gonna be tasty? Like, let's just cook at home. We're not gonna. Do you know how I do? You know how I do. I don't know why y'all sitting there questioning. Why would you cook at home when I told you I'm cooking? And the next episode of Kitchen After Dark starts now. So I was watching this show, and it was this commentator. He was talking about how he's a liberal guy. I've watched him a few times, right? And he was talking about how our society has starting to accept different sizes. Body positivity is as a negative. It's like, you know, if you're fat, then you need to get healthy. It's this idea that there's one type of health, and he was, you know, and this is surprising because I've watched this guy. He's usually a very liberal guy. I want to ask y'all, what is your view? Or Ree, let me ask you first. What is your view on like how society views people of different sizes?
It's a big question.
I know it's a big question. Like it's a.
I think that there is like trends, just like there are with fashion, and depending on those trends will depend on how society sees you. And obviously, everyone knows that like, this is my body, this is what it's going to look like. So you're like waiting on the trend to finally be somewhat acceptable. Currently, I feel like society's acceptance levels of that particular body is thick. Anything that is outside of the small waist, larger hips, big ass, that's acceptable fat. Anything beyond that point, you know, like an apple shape, someone that's like, you know, heavier in the top or heavier in the belly, someone who doesn't have an ass, that's when it becomes like, sorry, you're not the fat that I like. That's not my kind of fat. So yeah, the more that we see of the one particular plus size body, the more that everyone else is kind of just, you know, reclining in yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, that's my.
What about you, Lacey? How do you see the world seeing you and you know, just talking about size inclusion and all that?
I agree with Ray because most of your mainstream brands that use plus size models, they're plus size for the fashion industry, but they're not plus size in general. So they are your thick babes that have flat stomachs or like have a little bit of a pooch, but they don't have bellies. And quite often, even with some of our most notable plus size brands, they pad their models. So they make them look wider than they are, but they still have a flat stomach and they have a booty. Whereas someone like me, for example, I have a belly and no ass, and then like, can I swear?
Yeah, say what you're gonna say, girl.
Yeah, I have a belly and no ass, so that means that I get less bookings because I don't look the way that like mainstream media thinks that I should look. As far as health, I mean, you can't tell a person's health by their size.
Sure.
You know, I know so many thin people that have like mental health issues, like eating disorders or like chronic illnesses, and like that's the same with fat people too. But you can't tell just by looking at someone. But because we've been fed this narrative for so long, that's what people automatically assume is that because you're in a bigger body that you're not healthy.
Do you have, and this is a personal question, do you have problems going to the doctor? You know, do you have like questions that doctors ask bias that just approach you differently?
Not personally, because I have in the past, but I have a fantastic GP. He's been my GP for maybe 5 years. But I'm also a nurse. I'm a registered nurse, so I know how to advocate for myself, and I know enough science and enough medicine that if a doctor were to turn around to me for something that was not related to my health and say, well, you need to lose weight, then I can be like, no. And I have done, because, you know, on the odd occasion that my doctor's not available, I've seen different doctors at the clinic that I go to.
Yeah.
And they're always like, well, can I prescribe you some weight loss drugs while you're here?
Whoa.
Like, absolutely not. If you actually read in my history, I have anxiety, so most of those kind of drugs like increase your heart rate, but also like I had an eating disorder for a long time. So like you can't, that's not something that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But every time I bring up medical bias, because I have experienced it from both sides. So I've experienced it as a patient, but also I've experienced it as a nurse and watching doctors and other healthcare professionals
Just
that I
treat people
work with.
differently?
Yeah, treat people differently, but also I work in theatre and see people once they're asleep and then see doctors talk about patients differently.
Oh, wow.
And it doesn't happen a lot anymore, and I'm really grateful for that, because you have people in the room that are willing to stand up for the patient, and that's part of my job as a nurse. But it still happens, and so people come into my DMs or they comment. Like, some of my most viral TikToks have been about healthcare professionals and people like sharing their stories and being really vulnerable with that. And it's really sad that that still happens, but hopefully we're making some headway. You know, it starts with education, so in universities, but then it also needs to go into hospitals, and slowly but surely we're weeding out the older generation.
Bye-bye.
So, that's a good point. Is it a older generation thing? Like, as you know, people turn 50 and 60s that, you know, were born in the 60s and 70s. Are they just, you know, are we getting better because the younger generation is more accepting?
Yes and no. I think because society at large, it takes a long time to change perception. But if you're just talking medical, like the medical industry, the healthcare industry, it takes 7 to 10 years to implement any kind of change. So the healthcare industry is fueled by evidence, but also by bias. And so if you're going to do your PhD, for example, on like the difference between obesity and non-obese people and their health status, that takes 7 years to do a PhD, between 4 to 7 years, and then it takes up to 7 to 10 years to change, to implement the evidence that was seen in that study. So you're looking at like 15 years worth of change, when we know right now, and there is evidence to suggest that like this is what needs to happen and these are the actual facts, but it takes a long time. And you also need to find medical professionals that are willing to adopt that kind of change in practice. And like the fat phobia in the medical industry is so deeply ingrained, it's really hard.
So do you think that, and this is a question for everybody really, and I can answer it or chime in as well, like, do you think that the medical industry is the one that's driving these standards? Is it media? Is it magazine coverage? I was watching a TikTok of an old clip of American Top Model, and there was this black woman. Yeah. It came up on my feed, right? And it was this black woman, they called her a plus size model.
And she's like a size 12.
Yeah.
At max.
At max. I don't even know if she was a size 12.
We're looking at social norms. We're looking at, you know, I've worked in the health profession as well. I've got a thesis on like introducing structural change into the social norms of the medical institution, and we're also looking at the broader picture of social norms. And you're right, it's a 7 to 10 year process of change. Once you introduce a new idea, it's 7 to 2 years until that'll be implemented. What you're talking about is like much, much deeper and much older. We're looking at, you know, addressing media, like social norms, how we raise our children. Like from the minute girls are born, they're taught you've got to be pretty and, you know, and how you look, whereas boys are taught a totally different.
Well, I mean, I can even speak from a boy's perspective, because boys get teased if they're too skinny. They get teased if they're too big. Like there's this feeling. I've had issues with body dysmorphia, feeling like I wasn't enough. I needed to flatten my stomach. If I just lost 5 more kilos or 10 more pounds, I'd be perfect. It was just this idea. So men struggle with it. Like, this isn't okay for even from men. You know, it's been, even for myself, it's been a difficult road of understanding what I want as an individual, what my body wants, what my body can achieve. You know, sometimes you see 6 packs on social media, and you're like, man, I can't wait to get there. And it's like, what am I gonna do? Starve myself? No, I'm gonna eat chicken and waffles. Like
Yeah,
I've
you
learned.
are.
Hell
They're
yeah.
delicious.
Hell yeah.
Really deep into how we're raised in the social norms and looking at what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how we belong to a community and a
I mean,
culture.
the media has a lot to answer for where that kind of
Absolutely.
thing is concerned, because we grew up with shows like The Biggest Loser, which is so problematic, and like those kinds of shows, and models like Victoria's Secret and like your Cosmo that's always on the front page, like how such and such got this body, or like how this person ditched these kilos, like
Like the baby weight.
the post baby weight, like as if you shouldn't just be like resting and like nourishing your body and your child after you've had a baby. You know, you need to bounce back straight away, and it takes.
Oh, don't worry, girl. Breastfeeding the fat, it'll go away. Don't worry about it. It's like, come on, man.
And it's just like media has a lot to answer for, but it's so much unlearning. You know, when you grow up watching that kind of stuff, it's so in your head. And like the people that I talk to on a daily basis on my platforms, we all struggle with it because it takes so much unlearning. And when you're trying to consciously unlearn those things, but then the rest, like 80% of your social circle and your family, they all believe the stuff that you've been fed. It's so hard to like actually do the work and come out better for it.
Because it almost doesn't matter how much you do as an individual, you're still bound by these social norms and what's socially acceptable and what's not socially acceptable, right? So you can do all the work on yourself, but you still kind of got to conform to some level of what we abide by as a social community.
Yeah.
So, Arimaya, I wanted to ask you this. We've been talking mostly about size and body positivity, but yourself as a white presenting Aboriginal, how have you struggled? What's your story like?
It's a whole other conversation, but it's like, like it's a whole episode on just that.
Yeah.
But it's, trying to, like, I feel like a black person. Inside, I have the spirit of a black Aboriginal person. I'm connected to this country in a way that most white people are not. And it's a different thing. And I didn't know that until I was older.
Yeah.
Until I realised that not everybody goes at lunchtime at the age of 5 to talk to the trees or listen to the wind or the river. It's a very different thing. Yeah, I don't feel as white as I look at all. So it's about my identity and who I belong to. And I feel very black and very connected to this country.
Yeah.
But I present this way. And so I've experienced racism in a different way. Like I obviously, like, I'm a white privileged person because I present as white and I benefit from those things, but I identify deeply spiritually as an Aboriginal person.
Yeah.
So it's been a different kind of suffering.
Yeah.
Like I've benefited from the privilege of being as passing as I do in the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
internally I suffer because I know that I'm a black person.
Yeah. And
And
you
I
have
feel shame about that. Shame of my whiteness, shame of my red hair, because it comes from a whole story of rape and, annihilation and colonization. That's a completely other conversation, but it's a painful story. I don't feel like I fit in this body, and that hurts. It hurts me.
And there's nothing you can do about it unless you're changing your skin complexion or doing these other activities. But this is who you are, right? This is it's a struggle. I'm as a black man, as a black American man, I've always struggled with feeling accepted. My black body has been brutalized and police brutality, all of these things that happen to people that look like me. And it's a real struggle to really understand how do I work in this world? How do I fit in this world in this body? And I'm from the South Bronx, but I don't sound like I'm from the Bronx. People say that to me all the time. You don't sound like you're from there. But it's like, are you saying that I'm not something? Are you saying I'm not black enough?
Taking away my identity.
Yeah, it is, taking people's black card is a thing in the States. Like, if you don't know certain things about the black community, oh man, you get your black card taken. And that's really just denying it feels like it's denying my body if I'm not able to answer this question about a show from the 80s.
Yeah, you sit in that